The doctor looked at the 58-year-old woman and said with a smirk, "It's just stress and age. You need to worry less and lose some weight." He dismissed her pain, her intuition, her fear. He made a huge mistake. He didn't know that this woman would not give up and that she would return to prove herself right and destroy his career. Before we begin this inspiring story of fighting for one's life, please take a moment to write what city you're from in the comments below. We love to know who's watching. And of course, if you love stories about the strength of the human spirit, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. And now, get comfortable and prepare for the story of a woman who refused to be invisible. And remember, my dears, self-deprecation often harms health. In any case, consult a doctor. No matter what kind of person he is. This story is just one happy case out of tens of thousands. It began as a whisper, a subtle betrayal from within my own body. At 58, I was a woman who took pride in her own competence. For 30 years, I had been a research librarian at the City University, a human search engine who could navigate the most complex archives and bring order to chaos. My life was built on logic, on the quiet satisfaction of finding a definitive answer. I knew my body in the same way I knew the Dewey Decimal System. Every ache, every surge of energy, every limitation was a known quantity, a cataloged part of myself. But over the past year, a mysterious and unwelcome guest had taken up residence within me, and it was slowly, methodically dismantling the life I knew. The fatigue was the first and most profound invader. It was not the gentle, earned tiredness that comes after a long day of work in the garden. This was a deep, cellular exhaustion, a leaden weight that settled in my bones the moment I woke up and clung to me all day. It was like a permanent state of jet lag, a heavy cloak of weariness that no amount of sleep could lift. I would be in the middle of a task I once loved, repotting my orchids, their delicate, vibrant faces a source of quiet joy, and suddenly the energy would drain from me as if a plug had been pulled. My arms would feel too heavy to lift the watering can. The simple act of standing would feel like a monumental effort. I'd have to sit down right there on the floor of my sunroom and wait for the suffocating wave to pass. Then came the pain. It was a phantom, a mercurial tormentor that never settled in one place. One morning, it would be a sharp, stabbing sensation in the joints of my fingers, making it impossible to hold a book. The next, a dull, burning ache would spread through my thighs as if I had run a marathon in my sleep. Sometimes a strange tingling, like an army of tiny ants, would march up my arms for no reason at all. There was no logic to it, no pattern of cause and effect. It was chaos, and I, a woman who had built her life on order, was terrified. The final insult was the fog. As a librarian, my mind was my most treasured asset, but now it was becoming a treacherous landscape. Words I had known my entire life would vanish from my tongue mid-sentence. I would walk into a room and have no memory of why I was there. Trying to read a complex article, something I once did with ease, became a Herculean task. The sentences would blur together, their meaning slipping through my grasp like fine sand. It felt as if my own intellect, my very sense of self, was being slowly erased. I did what any good researcher would do. I began to collect data. I bought a simple, blue, lined notebook and started to document everything. May 12th. Woke up with severe pain in both wrists, 8:10. Fatigue level, debilitating. Could not finish the crossword puzzle, brain fog significant. May 19th, burning sensation in leg muscles, 6:10. numbness in my left hand for 2 hours in the afternoon. I was meticulous. I created charts. I tracked my sleep, my diet, my activities. I wanted to walk into my doctor's office armed not with vague emotional complaints, but with cold, hard facts. I wanted to give him the clues so that he, the expert, could solve the mystery. Dr. Adams had been my doctor for 15 years. He was a man who moved with a brisk, confident efficiency that had always reassured me in the past. He was the kind of doctor who could diagnose a case of bronchitis from across the room, a man who projected an aura of unassailable certainty. The appointment began, as it always did, with him barely looking up from his computer screen. "So, Brenda, what seems to be the trouble today?" he asked, his fingers still tapping away at his keyboard. I took a breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands, and opened my notebook. "Dr. Adams, I've been having some worrying symptoms for the better part of a year now," I began. "It started with a level of fatigue that is unlike anything I've ever experienced." "Fatigue," he echoed, stopping his typing to finally look at me. He nodded, a small knowing smile on his face. "Brenda, you're 58. Life is stressful. We see this all the time. It's a very common complaint." "I understand, but it's more than that." I pressed on, determined to be heard. "I'm also experiencing significant joint and muscle pain. It moves around, and a kind of brain fog that is affecting my ability to concentrate." I summoned my courage and pushed the blue notebook across the polished surface of his desk. "I've been keeping a detailed log of all of it." He glanced down at my carefully compiled research, at the pages of my suffering, and made no move to pick it up. He simply slid it back towards me with one finger. "That's very thorough," he said, the words a form of condescending praise. "But I don't think we need to go down that rabbit hole. Your blood work from your physical last year was immaculate." He leaned back in his big leather chair, steepling his fingers under his chin, assuming the posture of a wise sage about to deliver a simple, profound truth. "Tell me, how are things at home? The kids are gone. David is traveling more for work now that he's been promoted. That's a big adjustment. An empty nest can be a difficult transition." I felt a flush of anger creep up my neck. "My home life is fine. This is not a psychological issue, doctor. This is a physical one. I don't feel normal. I feel sick." He sighed, a long, weary sound, as if my refusal to accept his simplistic diagnosis was personally taxing him. He scribbled on his prescription pad. "Brenda," he said, his voice softening into a tone of patronizing kindness, "our bodies and our minds are connected. When we're under stress, when we're anxious about a new phase in our lives, the mind can create very real, very convincing physical symptoms. It's called somatic symptom disorder. I'm going to give you a prescription for a low-dose antidepressant. It will help take the edge off, quiet the anxiety. And I want you to seriously consider losing 10 or 15 pounds. That's the number one culprit for joint pain in women your age. Try yoga, take a vacation, learn to relax a little." He stood up, his smile unwavering, and extended a hand. A clear signal that my time was up. I walked out of that office, the prescription slip clutched in my hand, feeling smaller and more invisible than I had ever felt in my life. He hadn't just dismissed my symptoms. He had dismissed me. He had taken my carefully collected data and thrown it back in my face, replacing it with a diagnosis that suggested I was the author of my own suffering. I was just another hysterical woman, a collection of tired cliches. As I sat in my car in the sprawling hospital parking lot, the shame he had instilled in me began to curdle, hardening into a cold, unfamiliar resolve. He was wrong. I was not a cliche. I was a researcher, and my most important research project had just begun. I was going to find the truth myself. The drive home was a blur of familiar streets seen through a film of newfound rage. The prescription slip for the antidepressants sat on the passenger seat, a small white rectangle of paper that felt more like an indictment than a cure. It was a testament to Dr. Adams's failure, a tidy, dismissive summary of my entire existence as he saw it. A woman whose suffering was not a valid medical mystery, but a flaw in her own character. He had listened to my meticulously documented account of a body in revolt and had heard only the ramblings of a sad, aging woman. The shame he had so expertly instilled in me in his cold, sterile office burned hot in my cheeks. For a few terrifying moments, I allowed his verdict to take root. What if he was right? What if this profound weariness was just the natural decay of age? What if the pain was the physical manifestation of a lonely, purposeless mind? The thought was a cold poison, seeping into the cracks of my confidence, making me question the very reality I was experiencing. But then the anger returned, a righteous and cleansing fire. I was Brenda Hayes. I had raised 2 children, navigating the labyrinth of fevers, scraped knees, and teenage heartbreaks. I had managed a university research library for 30 years, a career that demanded precision, intellectual rigor, and an unwavering commitment to facts. I had held my husband's hand through his own health scares, advocated for him, and deciphered the complex language of medical reports. I knew what real stress felt like. I knew what it was to worry. This thing that was living inside me was different. It was a foreign invader, a cold clinical presence that had nothing to do with my emotions. To suggest that I had somehow invented this illness out of boredom or sadness was not just a misdiagnosis. It was an act of profound disrespect. It was then, as I pulled into my own driveway, that I picked up the prescription slip. I didn't just crumple it. I tore it into 4 precise, satisfying pieces and let them fall like confetti into the empty cup holder. It was my first act of rebellion. I walked into the house to the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee. My husband, David, was in the kitchen, his face a picture of hopeful concern. He was a good man, a kind man, an engineer who saw the world in logical, solvable problems. He trusted systems. He trusted experts. So, what did the good doctor have to say? He asked, handing me a warm mug. Did he figure out what's been making my girl so tired? I sank into a kitchen chair, the warmth of the mug doing little to thaw the chill inside me. He thinks I'm imagining it, David, I said, my voice flat. He thinks it's stress. He told me to lose weight and take antidepressants. David listened, his brow furrowed. I watched him process the information, and I saw the exact moment he made his decision, the decision to trust the expert. Well, honey, he began, his voice gentle and reasonable. He is the doctor. He's got years of experience. Maybe he has a point. You have been under a lot of stress lately with the library fundraiser and all, and we could both probably stand to lose a few pounds. It couldn't hurt, right? We could start walking together in the evenings. He smiled, a kind, well-intentioned smile that completely invalidated my reality. He was trying to solve the problem, to offer a practical, loving solution, but all I heard were the echoes of Dr. Adams's dismissiveness. All I felt was the profound, crushing weight of being utterly alone in my own experience. Even the man I loved, the man who had shared my life for 4 decades, was now looking at me through the filter of another man's flawed, arrogant judgment. That evening, Feeling defeated and invisible, I retreated to my home office. It was my sanctuary, a small room lined with books, a space dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. My blue notebook, the one filled with my rejected data, was sitting on the corner of the desk. My first instinct was to put it in a drawer, to bury the evidence of my own foolishness, but then my gaze fell upon my own handwriting. Neat, clear, and logical. I had recorded facts. I had trusted my observations. Why was I now willing to discard my own careful research in favor of one man's 10-minute uniformed opinion? A new feeling began to surface, pushing past the shame and the anger. It was a familiar feeling, the one I felt whenever I was faced with a complex research problem at the library. It was a quiet, cold determination. The librarian inside me, the woman who believed that an answer could always be found if you were willing to dig deep enough, was finally waking up. Dr. Adams may have closed the case, but I was reopening it. I had spent my entire career finding the truth for other people. I had navigated obscure databases, translated archaic texts, and followed faint, forgotten paper trails to uncover information for students and professors. I possessed a unique set of skills. And for the first time, I realized I would have to turn that formidable arsenal of knowledge inward. I sat down in my comfortable, worn desk chair, the familiar weight of it a comfort. I turned on my computer, the screen casting a hopeful glow in the dimming room. I didn't navigate to the generic, fear-mongering pages of WebMD. I went to the university's online portal, a gateway to the world's most respected medical journals and clinical databases, a resource I still had access to as a retired employee. I was no longer Brenda Hayes, the sad, tired patient. I was Brenda Hayes, the lead researcher on the most important case of my life. My subject was myself, and I would not rest until I found the truth. The nights became my new workday. After David had gone to sleep, his steady breathing a quiet rhythm in the silent house, I would retreat to my office. The world would shrink to the size of my desk, the glow of the computer monitor casting a cool blue light on my face. In this solitary bubble, I began my hunt. I was a librarian again, but the library was the vast, often contradictory and terrifying world of medical science, and the subject I was researching was the mystery of my own collapsing body. I started with the cold clinical language of my symptoms, translating my personal experience into the searchable jargon of the medical profession. The all-encompassing weariness became profound fatigue. The migrating aches were migratory arthralgia, the tingling in my hands, paresthesia, the frustrating mental slips, cognitive dysfunction. I plunged into the university's databases, a world of peer-reviewed journals and clinical trial results that was a universe away from the simple, often panicked, advice found on public health websites. The initial results were an overwhelming deluge of information. Thousands of articles and studies flooded my screen, each one a dense, intimidating wall of text. The list of potential culprits was a roll call of my worst fears: multiple sclerosis, rare neurological disorders, early onset dementias, even obscure forms of cancer. For the first few nights, fear was my constant companion. Every abstract I read, every case study I skimmed, seemed to present a new and more terrifying possible future. It felt like I was lost in the middle of an ocean of data, with no land in sight. I would work until the early hours of the morning, my eyes burning, my body aching, and fall into bed more confused and frightened than before. But slowly, methodically, my researcher's instincts began to take over. Fear gave way to focus. I started to build a methodology. I created spreadsheets. I cross referenced symptoms, tracked incidence rates, and noted common diagnostic procedures. I began to eliminate possibilities with the same dispassionate logic I would use to debunk a flawed historical thesis. The pattern of my neurological symptoms didn't align with the typical progression of MS. My core memory and personality were still intact, making degenerative dementia less likely. I was a detective, and my own body was the crime scene. The list of suspects was still long, but it was no longer infinite. After weeks of this lonely, nocturnal work, a clear and undeniable pattern began to emerge from the data. The conditions that remained on my list of possibilities, the ones whose symptoms most closely mirrored my own chaotic experience, almost all fell under one broad, complex category: autoimmune disease, lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia. These were diseases where the body's own defense system mistakenly turned on itself, attacking healthy tissue and creating a cascade of systemic inflammation. As I delved deeper into the world of autoimmunity, a second, more disturbing pattern came into focus. The vast majority of these diseases disproportionately affected women, many of them striking in middle age, during the very hormonal shifts that doctors like Adams were so quick to blame. And then came the third pattern, the one that made the hair on my arms stand up. In the patient histories, in the introductions to clinical studies, in the footnotes of dense research papers, the same story appeared again and again, a story of delayed diagnosis, a story of initial misdiagnosis, a story of women spending years, sometimes decades, being told their very real, very physical symptoms were psychosomatic. They were told it was stress, anxiety, depression, or, the most common and insulting of all, that it was all in their heads. It was a staggering revelation. The problem wasn't just my mysterious illness. The problem was a systemic gendered bias woven into the very fabric of the medical system I had been taught to trust. My experience with Dr. Adams wasn't a personal failure. It was a textbook example of a widespread phenomenon. I wasn't just fighting a disease. I was fighting a prejudice that was so pervasive it was almost invisible. The discovery didn't fill me with despair. It filled me with a cold, hard rage and a profound sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. My notebook of symptoms wasn't a diary of anxieties. It was a data set proving a case that millions of other women were also trying to prove. This new understanding shifted the focus of my research. I began to use new search terms, phrases that combined the clinical with the social. I typed in autoimmune misdiagnosis women, doctors dismiss chronic pain, told my fatigue was just anxiety. The search led me away from the formal journals and into a different corner of the internet, tucked away on a simple text-based message board on a website that looked like it hadn't been updated since the dawn of the internet. I found a link. It was to a private, members-only online forum. It was called The Invisible Sisterhood, a health advocacy community for women. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the mouse. It felt so unofficial, but the name called to me, invisible. That was exactly how I felt. I filled out the simple application, and a day later I was approved. When I logged in for the first time, my heart began to pound. It was a library of shared experience. There were thousands of posts, threads dedicated to specific symptoms, to doctors, to moments of despair and triumph. I clicked on a thread titled, "Things Your Doctor Said That Made You Want to Scream." The first post read, "He told me to try yoga and lose 15 pounds. It took 2 more years to get my lupus diagnosis. The next one said, my doctor called my brain fog menopause brain and told me to get a hobby. I have Sjogren's syndrome that was attacking my nervous system. Another, I spent 5 years and saw 7 different specialists being told I was a hypochondriac before a female rheumatologist finally listened and diagnosed my fibromyalgia. I scrolled through the posts, page after page, story after story, and the tears that I'd been holding back for months finally began to fall. They were not tears of sadness or of fear. They were tears of profound, earth-shattering recognition. These women, these strangers from all over the country, were telling my story. I wasn't a lonely researcher in a dark room anymore. I had found my people. I had found my tribe. I was not alone. For the first few days, I was a ghost in their machine, a silent observer. I navigated the simple text-based architecture of the Invisible Sisterhood with the focus of a scholar discovering a lost library. The forum was a revelation, a masterclass in patient advocacy built by the very women the system had failed. There were sections dedicated to deciphering lab results, to appealing insurance denials, and a sprawling, meticulously curated database of doctor reviews, searchable by city and specialty. This wasn't just a support group. It was a grassroots intelligence network. Here, the anecdotal evidence that Dr. Adams had so casually dismissed was treated as valuable data. The women had developed a new language to describe their shared experience, with terms like spoony for those with limited energy, brain fog to describe the cognitive haze, and, most powerfully, medical gaslighting, for the specific brand of dismissive arrogance we had all encountered. Learning this new vocabulary was empowering. It gave a name to my suffering, transforming it from a personal failing into a shared systemic injustice. I spent hours absorbing the collective wisdom, the hard-won knowledge of thousands of women who had been forced to become experts on their own rare and complex conditions. They were warriors, and this forum was their war room. Yet, despite the validation I felt, I hesitated to post my own story. To write it all down, to send it out into this community of strangers, felt like an act of profound vulnerability. It meant admitting, in a public space, just how dismissed and foolish I had been made to feel. After a week of silent observation, I finally summoned the courage. With trembling fingers, I opened a new thread in the undiagnosed and seeking advice section. The subject line I chose was simple. 58 years old, was told it's just stress. I don't believe it. I poured my heart into the post. I wrote about the leaden fatigue, the migrating pains, the frustrating fog. I wrote about my blue notebook, the pages filled with data that no one would read. I wrote about Dr. Adams, his condescending smile, his prescription for antidepressants, his advice to just relax. I detailed the conversation with my husband, the well-intentioned invalidation, the profound sense of isolation. I ended my post with a simple, desperate plea. I don't know what to do next. I feel like I'm at a dead end. Please, can anyone help me? I hit the submit button and felt a terrifying wave of exposure wash over me. I expected to wait days for a response, if any came at all. I was wrong. Within an hour, my inbox began to ping. Then it pinged again and again. The responses were a tidal wave of support, a chorus of voices rising from the digital darkness to meet my own. The first reply was from a user named SpoonyWarrior82. It simply said, "Brenda, welcome. I'm so sorry you had that experience. We see you, we hear you, and we believe you." The words were so simple, yet they brought tears to my eyes. It was the validation I had been so desperate to hear from my own doctor, my own husband. Another user, LabTech Laura, wrote, "Your Dr. Adams is a classic. We've all met him. The Blue Notebook is a brilliant idea. Don't ever let anyone dismiss your data. But you're right. You're at a dead end with him. You need to see a rheumatologist, a good one. They are the detectives of the medical world." A third, from Fierce Femme 535, was full of righteous anger on my behalf. Tear up that prescription. You are not depressed. You are undiagnosed. The number of us who were pushed onto antidepressants while our bodies were riddled with inflammation is a scandal. You are your own best advocate. Don't ever forget that. The messages kept coming, a flood of practical advice, shared experiences, and fierce, unwavering support. These women didn't offer pity. They offered solidarity. They were an army, and they were welcoming me into their ranks. The isolation that had been my constant companion for a year began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of belonging so powerful it felt like coming home. That evening, a private message appeared in my inbox. It was from a user whose name I had seen mentioned with reverence throughout the forums. Advocate Anne. She was one of the site's moderators. Her message was direct and kind. "Brenda, I just read your introductory post. Your story and your methodical approach to tracking it is incredibly familiar. You sound like a woman who is ready to fight. Can I ask what city you're in?" My fingers flew across the keyboard as I typed my reply, my heart hammering in my chest. "Atlanta," I wrote. A few minutes later, her response came, and it would prove to be the message that changed the entire course of my life. "I thought so," she wrote. "You have one of the best right in your backyard. You need to make an appointment with Dr. Imani Wright. She is a Black woman, a rheumatologist at the top of her field, and most importantly, she listens. She's known in our community as the bulldozer because she will not stop digging and testing until she finds an answer. She doesn't just treat symptoms, she believes her patients. She saved my life and the lives of half a dozen other women I know personally. Her waiting list can be long, but use my name. Tell her Annabelle sent you from the sisterhood." I stared at the name on the screen, Dr. Imani Wright. I quickly opened a new browser tab and searched for her. The first result was a professional photo from her university hospital profile. It showed a woman about my age, with intelligent, kind eyes and an expression that was both serious and deeply compassionate. She was a Black woman. A woman who had likely navigated her own set of systemic biases and obstacles to get to where she was. As I looked at her picture, a feeling I hadn't experienced in over a year washed over me, so potent and so unfamiliar I almost didn't recognize it. It was hope. A pure, undeniable, and electrifying surge of hope. My fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I knew I would no longer be fighting it alone. I picked up the phone to make the appointment. The 6 weeks I had to wait for my appointment with Dr. Imani Wright were a strange and novel form of purgatory. The familiar daily landscape of my symptoms, the oppressive fatigue, the migrating aches, the frustrating mental fog remained unchanged. Yet my experience of them was transformed. The gnawing despair that had been my constant companion was replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. Hope was a dangerous thing, a delicate butterfly of a feeling that I was almost afraid to acknowledge lest it be crushed. But it was there, a tiny, persistent flutter in my chest. I now had a date circled in red on my calendar, a destination. It was no longer a matter of if I would get answers, but when. During this waiting period, I became an active citizen of the Invisible Sisterhood. I moved from being a grateful reader to a contributing member. I shared my small victory of securing the appointment, and my post was met with a chorus of encouragement and celebration from my new unseen friends. "You've got this, Brenda," one wrote. "Dr. Wright is a force of nature," another added. I found myself spending hours each evening not just researching my own condition, but offering support to other women who were just beginning their own lonely journeys. I shared the research techniques I had honed over a lifetime, helping them formulate the right questions to ask, guiding them toward the right terminology. I was a librarian again, and it felt wonderful. I was taking the powerlessness I had felt and transforming it into a tool to empower others. I prepared for my appointment with Dr. Wright with the same meticulous rigor I would have used to prepare for a dissertation defense. I took my blue notebook and distilled its year of data into a crisp 2-page executive summary, complete with a timeline of symptoms and a list of all the questions I had. I printed out the most relevant clinical studies I had found, highlighting key passages about the underdiagnosis of autoimmune diseases in Black women. This was more than a doctor's visit. It was an appeal. I was a client, presenting my case to a higher court, and I would not be found wanting for lack of preparation. The day of the appointment, I dressed in a simple but professional lavender blouse and gray trousers. I wanted to look not like a patient, but like a partner. David drove me, his attitude a mixture of skepticism and spousal duty. "I just don't want you to get your hopes up too high, honey," he said gently on the way. "She's just another doctor." I knew he was trying to protect me from further disappointment, but his words revealed how little he understood the seismic shift that had occurred within me. This was not just another doctor. This was a doctor who had been vetted by a jury of my peers, a doctor who came with the highest recommendation from a community of women who knew intimately what was at stake. The atmosphere in Dr. Wright's waiting room was the first sign that I was in a different world. It was nothing like the cold, sterile functionality of Dr. Adams's office. The lighting was warm and soft, the chairs were comfortable, upholstered in soothing shades of green and blue. The walls were adorned not with generic corporate art, but with vibrant, original paintings by local Black artists. Even the music was different, a gentle instrumental jazz that calmed the nerves rather than fraying them. The intake forms the friendly receptionist handed me were another revelation. They included the standard medical questions, of course, but there was also a section titled Your Health Journey. It asked questions like, have you felt listened to by previous providers? And what are your personal goals for your health and well-being? And describe in your own words the impact your symptoms have had on your daily life. For the first time, a medical document was asking not just about my body, but about my experience. I felt a lump form in my throat as I wrote. When a nurse finally called my name, she led me into an examination room and took my vitals with a gentle, unhurried efficiency. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Dr. Imani Wright entered. She was exactly as she had appeared in her photo, her face intelligent and warm, her eyes holding a deep, compassionate wisdom. She was not wearing a stiff white lab coat, but a stylish professional dress. She walked directly to me, took my hand in both of hers, and looked me straight in the eye. "Brenda Hayes," she said, her voice a smooth, calming alto. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you. I've read the notes from your file. Now, I want you to put all that aside. I want you to start from the very beginning and tell me your story. I have a full hour, and I want to hear it all in your own words." And so I did. I talked, and she listened. She truly listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't type on her computer. She sat on the stool opposite me, her body angled towards me, her focus absolute. She nodded, her expression never wavering from one of intense, empathetic concentration. When I stumbled, she would ask a gentle, clarifying question. When you say the pain burns, Brenda, is it a surface burn like a sunburn or a deeper muscular burn? Her questions were not challenges, they were tools to help me build a clearer picture for her. When I finally finished and pushed my blue notebook and my file of research across the table, I did so with a feeling of trepidation. Dr. Wright took the notebook, her expression one of genuine respect. She opened it and slowly turned the pages, her eyes scanning my neat, handwritten charts. She looked at the summary I had prepared, at the articles I had printed. After a full 2 minutes of silent, careful review, she looked up at me, and her face broke into a small, magnificent smile. "Brenda," she said, her voice filled with a sincere admiration that almost broke me. "This is magnificent. You're a researcher's dream. You have no idea how valuable this is. You've done half my job for me." The validation I felt from Dr. Wright's words was so powerful, so profoundly healing. It was like a parched desert landscape receiving its first rain. I felt a decade of pent-up tension begin to release from my shoulders. For years, I had been tensing against the world, bracing for the next dismissal, the next condescending smile. In her office, for the first time, I felt safe enough to let my guard down. Dr. Wright then transitioned seamlessly from empathetic listener to expert strategist. She stood up and walked to the anatomical chart on the wall, and for the first time, I felt like a student in a fascinating lecture rather than a specimen under a microscope. "Brenda," she began, her tone collaborative, as if she were inviting me into the diagnostic process with her. "Based on your meticulous symptom log, the migratory nature of your arthralgia, the profound fatigue that is clearly systemic, and the neurological symptoms like the brain fog and paresthesia, my primary suspicion falls within the broad spectrum of a systemic autoimmune or connective tissue disease." She looked me directly in the eye. Dr. Adams' diagnosis of a somatic disorder was not, in my professional opinion, a diagnosis at all. It was a failure to investigate. So today, we are going to begin a very thorough investigation. She sat back down and pulled out a lab requisition form, a long sheet of paper with dozens of tiny checkboxes. The sheer number of tests she began to tick off was a stark, visual contrast to Dr. Adams's dismissive prescription slip. "We'll start with a baseline," she explained, her pen moving with swift precision, "a complete blood count and a comprehensive metabolic panel. Then, we need to look for evidence of inflammation. For that, we'll run an erythrocyte sedimentation rate, or ESR, and a C-reactive protein test, the CRP. Think of these as our smoke detectors. They can't tell us where the fire is, but they can tell us if one is burning somewhere in your body." She continued, her voice a calm, steady guide through the complex territory. "The most important test I'm ordering is a full anti-nuclear antibody panel, the ANA. In many autoimmune diseases, the body produces antibodies that attack the nucleus of its own cells. A positive ANA is like a big, flashing clue that points us in the right direction. It doesn't give us the final answer, but it tells us we're on the right trail." She then checked off a series of more specific esoteric tests: anti-SSA-RO, anti-SSB-LA, anti-dsDNA, explaining that these were antibodies for more specific conditions like Sjogren's syndrome and lupus. She was demystifying the process, translating the arcane language of medicine into something I could understand, treating me as an intelligent and capable partner in my own health care. When she was finished, she handed me the form. It was a battle plan. The days that followed were a strange mixture of anxiety and hope. The simple act of going to the lab to have my blood drawn felt monumental. As I sat in the chair and watched the phlebotomist fill vial after vial with my blood, I felt a strange sense of offering. For a year, my suffering had been invisible, ephemeral, easy to dismiss. Now, here it was, a tangible physical substance, a liquid archive of my body's secrets that was about to be read and analyzed. For better or for worse, the truth was in there. During the week-long wait for the results, I leaned heavily on my newfound community in the Invisible Sisterhood. I posted an update on my appointment with Dr. Wright, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The women there had a term for the profound anxiety of waiting for test results: scanxiety. They shared their own stories, offered words of encouragement, and provided a constant, comforting presence in the digital darkness. They understood, in a way my own loving husband could not, the terror of being in limbo, of simultaneously fearing what the tests might find, and fearing they might find nothing at all. Finally, the call came. It was the nurse from Dr. Wright's office. Her voice was kind but professional. She wouldn't give me the results over the phone, but asked if I could come in the following afternoon to discuss them with the doctor. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. I asked David to come with me, and this time he agreed without a word of skepticism. Dr. Wright's thoroughness had finally broken through his faith in Dr. Adams' dismissiveness. He was scared now, too. We sat in the examination room, the same warm, inviting room as before, but today it was charged with a palpable tension. David held my hand, his grip tight. When Dr. Wright entered, her expression was calm and compassionate, but serious. She did not waste time with small talk. She sat down and looked at me, her gaze steady and kind. "Brenda," she said softly, "we have an answer." She opened the file in her lap. Your inflammatory markers, the CRP and ESR, were both highly elevated. That tells us there is a significant inflammatory process happening in your body. It is not in your head. Your anti-nuclear antibody test also came back with a high positive titer, but the most definitive result came from the specific antibody panel. She took a breath. You tested positive for the anti-SSA and anti-SSB antibodies. Brenda, you have Sjogren's syndrome. Sjogren's? The name sounded foreign, strange. She went on to explain, in clear, simple terms, what it was. An autoimmune disease that, in its classic form, attacked the body's moisture-producing glands, causing dry eyes and dry mouth. But in its systemic form, she explained, it could also cause the exact constellation of symptoms I had been documenting for over a year: debilitating fatigue, severe joint and muscle pain, and neurological issues, including the brain fog that had made me feel like I was losing my mind. As she spoke, I felt not a wave of fear or sadness, but a profound, overwhelming, and soul-shattering wave of relief. The tears that came were not from grief, but from the sheer, unadulterated release of a burden I had carried for so long. Every symptom, every moment of pain, every instance of confusion now had a name. It had a reason. It was real. I looked at David. His face was pale with shock, and I could see a wave of guilt and regret wash over him as he finally understood the reality of what I had been enduring. He squeezed my hand, his own eyes welling with tears. I looked back at Dr. Wright, my vision blurry. So, I'm not crazy, I whispered, the words a final necessary exorcism of the doubt that had haunted me. Dr. Wright's expression was fierce with a protective anger on my behalf. No, Brenda, she said, her voice full of an unwavering certainty that felt like a shield. You are not crazy. You are not a hypochondriac. You are a woman with a chronic systemic autoimmune disease. And now that we have a name for your battle, we can finally begin to fight back. The name of my illness, Sjogren's syndrome, settled in the room, not with a crash, but with a quiet, profound sense of order. For over a year, I had been living in a house of chaos, my body a cacophony of nonsensical, screaming symptoms. The diagnosis was like a master librarian finally stepping into a ransacked library, finding the correct card for my catastrophe, and beginning the slow, deliberate process of putting everything back in its rightful place. The relief was so absolute, so all-encompassing, that it felt like every tense muscle in my body unclenched at once. Dr. Wright, in her infinite wisdom, understood that this moment was about more than just delivering a lab result. She gave us a moment to absorb the news, to let the tears of relief subside, before she seamlessly transitioned from diagnostician to my new partner and chief strategist. She turned her computer screen towards us, showing me the elevated inflammatory markers and the starkly positive antibody results. She was showing me the proof, the undeniable black and white data that I had been right all along. Now, the road ahead, she said, her tone shifting to one of practical, forward-moving optimism. Sjogren's is a chronic condition, Brenda, which means we don't have a cure, but we have a wide and effective arsenal of treatments to manage it. This is not a passive disease, and we will not be passive in fighting it. She began to outline a comprehensive treatment plan, speaking to me not as a frail patient, but as if I were the CEO of my own health, and she was my most trusted advisor. She spoke of medications like Plaquenil to reduce the systemic inflammation, of specialized eye drops and mouth rinses to manage the dryness, of physical therapy to support my joints. She spoke of lifestyle adjustments, of honoring my body's need for rest, of learning to manage the cycles of flare-ups and remission. She then looked at David, who had been sitting in stunned, guilty silence, his hand still clutching mine. She addressed him directly, her voice kind but firm, a clear act of alliance with me. David, she said, your wife's fatigue is not laziness. Her pain is not an overreaction. Her brain fog is not a sign of emotional distress. It is the physiological result of her immune system being in a constant state of war with her own body. The most important thing you can do is to become her partner in this. Believe her, support her, and help her conserve her energy. It was a masterfully delivered speech, a course correction for our marriage, and a final, definitive validation of my experience. David simply nodded, his eyes filled with a new, profound understanding and a deep, unspoken apology to me. The car ride home was a world away from the silent, lonely journey back from Dr. Adams' office months earlier. The air was not thick with shame and misunderstanding, but clear with the truth. David drove, and for the first 10 minutes, he was silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Brenda, I am so sorry, he whispered, his eyes fixed on the road. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you. The doctor, I let him convince me it was easier to believe you were stressed than to believe you were sick. I failed you. And I am so sorry. I reached over and placed my hand on his arm. The anger and resentment I had harbored towards him had dissolved in the healing light of Dr. Wright's office. We both trusted a system that was supposed to be trustworthy, I said, my voice filled with a forgiveness that surprised even me. He failed both of us, but we know the truth now, and we'll face it together. When we got home, the first thing I did was log on to the Invisible Sisterhood forum. I opened a new thread, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The subject line was, an answer, a name, a beginning. I told him everything, about Dr. Wright, about the battery of tests, about the final validating diagnosis of Sjogren's syndrome. I thanked them for their support, for their guidance, for giving me the courage to keep fighting. The response was a digital tidal wave of celebration. They rejoiced with me, these women I had never met. Their shared victory, a powerful testament to the community we had built. As I read their messages, a new feeling began to take shape alongside my relief. It was a cold, clear-eyed, and utterly implacable anger. My personal battle for a diagnosis was over, but a larger one was just beginning. I thought of Dr. Adams. I thought of his smug, dismissive smile, of the way he had waved away my notebook, and I thought of the other women. How many others had he sent away from his office with a prescription for antidepressants and a patronizing pat on the hand? How many were sitting at home right now, suffering in silence, believing they were crazy because he had refused to do his job? David, I said, turning away from the computer, I need to do something. Whatever you need, Brenda, he said, his voice full of a new, unwavering support. A new diet will do it. Physical therapy, I'll drive you every day. No, I said, it's not about my treatment. I took a deep breath. I'm making one last appointment to see Dr. Adams. David looked confused. Why on earth would you do that? You never have to see that man again. I know, I replied, a hard, determined glint in my eye that he hadn't seen in years. But he has to see me. This isn't about revenge, David. It's about accountability. He needs to see his mistake. He needs to know that he was wrong so that he never, ever does what he did to me to another woman again. I was no longer just a patient. I had found my voice and I was about to use it. Making the appointment to see Dr. Adams was a surprisingly simple act. I did not announce my intentions. I simply told the receptionist I needed a brief follow-up to discuss a new diagnosis from a specialist. The ease with which she scheduled me spoke volumes. In their world, I was still the compliant, slightly neurotic patient from their records. The morning of the appointment, I prepared my materials with the calm precision of a lawyer preparing for trial. I assembled a slim, devastating file. The first document was the summary from my last visit with him, with his official diagnosis of somatic symptom disorder and anxiety. The second was the formal diagnostic letter from Dr. Imani Wright, clearly outlining her findings. Behind that, I placed a stark, undeniable lab reports, the high positive ANA, the elevated inflammatory markers, the specific antibodies that name my disease. The final page was a personal letter Dr. Wright had written at my request, a professional but pointed summary of my case, the clear pattern of my symptoms, and the profound failure of my primary care physician to investigate them. David, my rock-solid convert, asked to come with me, a silent offer of support and protection. I gently declined. "Thank you, my love," I told him, kissing his cheek. "But this is a journey I have to finish alone." It was my voice he silenced. It needs to be my voice that he hears. Walking back into that cold, sterile office felt like returning to the scene of a crime. The same generic art hung on the walls, the same outdated magazines were fanned out on the table, but I was not the same woman who had sat here months ago, filled with a nervous hope that had been so cruelly extinguished. I walked with a newfound sense of purpose, my spine straight, the file in my handbag feeling not like a burden, but like a weapon. The nurse led me to the same examination room. When Dr. Adams entered, he had a look of mild irritation on his face, his time clearly being wasted. "Brenda," he said, not making eye contact as he glanced at my chart. "The nurse says you have a new diagnosis you wanted to discuss. Did you have a reaction to the antidepressant?" The question was so condescending, so perfectly in character, I almost had to admire his consistency. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my handbag, took out my file, and slid it across the small desk to him. He looked at the folder, then at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. He picked it up. I watched his face as he read. It was a slow, fascinating, and deeply satisfying transformation. His initial look of annoyance melted into professional curiosity as he saw Dr. Wright's letterhead. The curiosity gave way to a flicker of disbelief as he scanned her diagnosis. The disbelief morphed into a dawning, sickening comprehension as he saw the lab reports, the cold, hard numbers that backed it all up. Finally, he looked at the copy of his own dismissive notes, and his face at last registered the full, catastrophic magnitude of his failure. The professional mask crumbled, revealing a pale, shaken man. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing silently for a moment before he found his voice. "Brenda, I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Sjogren's. It can be notoriously difficult to diagnose. The symptoms are so nonspecific." It was then that I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, even, and devoid of the rage that had fueled me for months. All that was left was a cold, clear, and unbreakable truth. "It is difficult to diagnose a disease," I said, "when you make no attempt to investigate it. It is impossible to find an answer when you refuse to listen to the questions." I stood up, my presence seeming to fill the small room. "I am not here to sue you for malpractice, doctor, although my lawyer tells me I have an excellent case. I am not even here to yell at you. I am here because I needed you to see me, not as a collection of middle-aged female cliches, not as a hypochondriac, not as an inconvenience in your busy schedule. I needed you to see me as the human being whose life was falling apart and who came to you for help." I let that hang in the air for a moment. You didn't look at my notes. You didn't listen to my story. You looked at my age, my gender, and my weight, and you put me in a box. You diagnosed a stereotype, not a patient. My pain was real, my fatigue was real, and your negligence was real. "Brenda, I am truly sorry," he began, his voice thick with a new desperate sincerity. I held up a hand. "Your apology is irrelevant to me now. What is relevant is the future. I am filing a formal, detailed complaint with the State Medical Board and with this hospital's Patient Advocacy Board. I'm including copies of every document you hold in your hand. I am not doing it for revenge. I am doing it so that the next time a woman sits in this chair looking tired and scared and telling you a story you find inconvenient, you will remember my name, and you will do your job." I then turned, walked out of the examination room, past the stunned nurse and out of his office forever, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his own arrogance. I did not look back. 6 months later, the community center buzzes with life. I am sitting at a folding table, a cheerful, hand-painted banner behind me that reads, "The Invisible Sisterhood, Patient Advocacy Network, Atlanta Chapter." My life is different now. My health is a constant negotiation, a daily dance between activity and rest, but it does not define me. My purpose does. After my story was posted on the forum, women from my own city reached out. We started a support group, a real world extension of the digital community that saved me. We meet once a month. We share resources, we recommend doctors, and we go with each other to appointments. A silent, supportive presence, ensuring that no one is ever dismissed again. Today, we are at a health fair, handing out flyers. A woman, about my age, approaches the table hesitantly. My doctor says my fatigue is just depression, she whispers, her eyes filled with a familiar, hopeless pain. I smile at her, a real warm smile of recognition, and I take her hand. You've come to the right place, I say. Let's talk. My victory was never about winning a battle against a single doctor. It was about taking my pain and transforming it into a shield for others. I had found my voice, and I was now using it to amplify the whispers of other women until they too became a roar that could no longer be ignored. And that was Brenda's story, dear friends. It's a powerful reminder that we must never give up, especially when it comes to our own health. Her journey teaches us to trust our intuition, to fight for the truth, and to seek support from those who are willing to listen. Sometimes the most important diagnosis we can make is realizing we need a new doctor. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. Your time and attention mean the world to us. Have you or anyone you know ever been in a situation where you felt you weren't being heard? Please share your experience in the comments below. Let's support one another. If you enjoy stories about the strength of the human spirit and justice, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes. To listen to the next story, you can click on the video that has just appeared on your screen. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.